Good morning. Many thanks for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Many thanks for having me.
Let's dive into our conversation now. Despite the gains in the rising global oil prices, what can you say is the rationale behind our declining oil revenue?
Okay, thanks, Blazer, for that question. And unfortunately, I think it's the one and the same old fundamental issue of reduced production output. And you made an allusion to that in your introductory comments to say that, we're still having threats of insecurity. We have issues around oil theft. We have issues around low investments within the oil and gas sector. So these are the usual suspects. They are still very much around with us within that sector. And I think that the only solution, the only way out is for us to then look at pragmatic solutions and see how we can wriggle out of the issues. Otherwise, they are the same issues, really.
Okay, let's focus now on this aspect of the conversation. With Nigeria retaining or regaining its status as the largest oil producer in Africa, why do we still have some low growth and contribution to the oil and gas sector to the GDP? And what should be done as a way out, as part of government efforts to stabilize or bring about a lasting solution to these challenges?
Okay, very many questions put all together. I would start by saying, if you talk about low growth, apparently again, because of low investments into that sector, particularly because things around COVID-19 did not necessarily help our economy, did not help the global oil economy in itself. And going from there, we then had the Russia-Ukraine invasion, for instance, that has lingered for quite a while. It's also not helped in that, as much as some people felt, maybe it would help increase the production, but unfortunately, we're not getting the very best of gains from that as well. So, but if you think about low growth, you will realize that the insecurity issues, particularly the domestic issues that Nigeria has, like we mentioned earlier, are very contributory to that. And then we move on to the low contribution. When we talk about low contribution, we need to put it in proper perspective, because it's only low contribution comparatively relative to other sectors of the economy is sub 10%, for instance, and it's been like that for quite a while. So if you think about it that way, when you compare it maybe to an Angola that does about 50%, the Saudi Arabia that does about 50% to the entire GDP of those nations, it might look like we're not doing well, but it also could mean that we are well diversified. We have contributions from the manufacturing, we have contributions from telecommunications. So basically, for me, I think the way out is for us to then be thinking of how we can have all the sectors doing very well at the same time. And so maybe we would increase that contribution in absolute terms, but not necessarily in terms of percentage.
Okay. All right. So for a country that still relies heavily on oil revenues to boost its forex earnings and fund its budget and other critical infrastructure in the country, what should be the approach of the government, especially as this new administration is gradually taking off business activities in terms of the management of the country's economy, in solving the challenges in the sector, and how can they increase more investment into the sector to drive growth and development?
Okay, I think that the previous government did try to do something with respect to helping stimulate investment into the oil and gas sector by passing the Petroleum Industry Act. Unfortunately, sometimes the regulations alone don't get the job done for us.
Okay.
What we need is the pragmatic nature of the influence the government puts into it in terms of implementing those laws. For instance, we've struggled with implementing the PIE with respect to the downstream sector, as respect to oil subsidy removal, and how we manage the impact and how it will trickle down to the benefits for everyone in Nigeria, and particularly for the sector in itself.
Okay.
So the implementation for me is very key. The security issues have to be fixed. We have to deal with issues that would more or less put issues around vandalization in the past. And so we can encourage people to come into the sector and put their money and be sure they can take them out easily. We need to deal with our forex issues, and I think that we've already taken a good step by saying we're unifying the exchange rate, and so we can encourage investors to come in, bring in their funds, and be able to take them out without so much issues. That's very concerning too, and it's something that has to be dealt with. But overall, I will say the fiscal issues, the security issues, the monetary issues need to be dealt with very decisively, and that way we can begin to see investors very happy with the oil and gas sector in Nigeria.
All right, good one there. Nigeria has many onshore and shallow water fields. The international companies, that's the IOCs, which the Nigerian oil sector relied heavily upon, have largely divested to offshore fields. What is really responsible for this, and what are the ripple effects on the nation's oil and gas sector? Can you take us through that?
Okay, thanks for that question. And as you can imagine, of course, the divestment has led to new challenges and opportunities for the country, and particularly for the oil and gas industry in Nigeria.
Yeah, very true.
When we talk about challenges, in the sense that some of the divestments were motivated by energy transition policies of those IOCs, and those things were not driven locally. They were driven by their HQs, whether in the Netherlands for Shell, for instance, or you're looking at the US for Chevron and France for Total. Yeah. So these are global issues, right? So some of these divestments, for some others, were things around security issues that we've talked about, because they were operating very close to the oil producing communities. And what that means is that those militants could easily reach them and disrupt their operations, right? Militancy was a big issue. The declining production from brownfields was yet another thing that also made them to take decisions to say, from an economic standpoint, we can't continue to make profits if we continue to use the sort of equipment that we have on this field. So we need to dimension the issues properly. We're going to be able to say, okay, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the ripple effects that this gives us? The apparent impact is that, of course, the lower impact, the lower production and the resultant, declining revenue that we see from the oil and gas activities in the country, issues around employment concerns. People would have to lose their jobs if those guys are going out of business, and of course the impoverishment of the local communities in themselves because of the sort of effect, the fact that decommissioning was not even put in place in some of those places. So those are issues. But more importantly for me, I like to look at the opportunities, because the divestments also then presents opportunities to local players, exactly, indigenous operators, to take up production fields and reverse the worrying implications of the divestment. So I see quite a number of opportunities in that regard, and I think that we should look more at that side and see how locals can indeed take up those fields and maximize the output from there.
All right, so some analysts say maintaining the current low level of output will shut the country's oil sector from the gains of rising global oil prices. What's your thoughts on this?
For me, this goes without saying, because of course the global oil economy is very dynamic, and it's directed, is moved by a lot of geopolitical factors, right? We mentioned briefly the issues around the Russia-Ukraine invasion, for instance. So there is no way you can
Temitope Kolade. Okay, I just went back now. Go ahead, what's
submission happening within that industry in Nigeria. Yeah, so you can't really absorb the Nigerian situation from what you see across the entire globe, right? So we need to then pay attention to issues around energy transition, for instance, the issues around. So the truth of the matter is this, that we need to have things around sustainable energy sources if you're going to if you're going to get the very best out of it. Otherwise, indeed, the prediction is right. We'll continue to experience a low level of output until we do something about it, because we will not always have the opportunity to get the very best from the oil and gas sector in Nigeria.
All right, Mr. Kolade, I am really concerned and worried about something here, and that's the declining and the shortfalls in oil production If this persists, if it continues, what would be the economic repercussions?
Well, low revenue for Nigeria, and we're already dealing with the issues. Low forex supply, because this accounts for about over 70% of our foreign exchange earnings. Now, what it means for the entire economy for Nigeria is that we're then struggling to even be able to meet the demand for foreign exchange, for USD. And overall, it means that the economy is just in shambles. We are having the widened gap between the Naira and the USD. So very big issues for us, definitely. And what it means for me is that we need to diversify the economy.
Okay.
We need to then see what we can do to improve our collection and, of course, the output from this aspect of the Nigerian economy.
I really want to get your thoughts on the fuel subsidy removal since this implementation came to play. We've not had you on the show to talk about this. So what can you say about the way and manner that this administration is managing the pains associated with subsidy removal, and what are your expectations with this development put in place? Do you think that is going to bring about the needed change that we're clamoring for that has to do with the removal of fuel subsidy?
Well, I think there is no running away from the issues. We're going to go through some pains.
Okay.
Whether it's been managed properly, I would say, indeed, with the benefit of hindsight, one would expect that certain things would have been put in place ahead of the removal of the subsidy. I would think that, for instance, maybe the government really had like a month to do proper planning before the complete removal of the subsidy. But that's gone behind us. I think it's antithetical to begin to then say, oh, we don't want the subsidy removal anymore, because we basically advocated for that removal earlier. It's just that it's not been properly managed. So we need to then deal with the issues. How do we deal with the issues? Maybe palliatives, but apparently what we are seeing being put on the table may not be reflective enough. We need to see the government show good cost by reducing the cost of governance itself, and then ensure that we can really have the promises that we had in terms of local production, right, coming to fruition. That's the way we can begin to reverse the trend. I think more importantly, the fundamental issues have to be resolved in terms of ensuring that we are not just an import-dependent economy. Whatever the government needs to put in place in terms of fiscal policies, monetary policies, to ensure that we begin to produce more than importing. That's way I think that we'll get the very best, because the issue, the fundamental issue we have with the subsidy removal right now is that we need dollars also to then import fuel into the country, and that's not helping at all. It puts a lot of pressure on our foreign exchange reserves if there is any significant amount in that reserve at all.
All right, I need to let you go now. You have a meeting you need to attend to. But finally now, you saw the ministerial list, and you've seen the names also. Now, Mr. Kolade, if we are to have a minister of, let's say, Minister of Petroleum Resources, and then we also have a Minister of Energy, what are your expectations and what agenda are you setting for such ministers?
Oh, well, this is a tough one because some precedents have been created in the past governments where the president basically made himself the substantive Minister of Petroleum
Resources.
So maybe this may not be far from it, but that's not a prediction from me, right?
Okay.
I'm just saying that the precedent has been set. So maybe we might not expect so much difference, but I would imagine that because the president had also chosen one very smart person at some point to be one of the special advisors, maybe that would contribute a lot to sort of policy direction that we should expect within that sector. But more importantly for me, I'll see that in terms of agenda setting is for us to look at that oil and gas industry from an holistic perspective and see how indeed we can ensure that we are not just producing crude and exporting crude, but more importantly, we produce crude and ensure that we are able to refine crude. Whatever policy that we want to set must be built around that.
Okay.
Because going from what I just said earlier, right, we cannot continue to be import dependent, and whatever can be done in the short run to ensure that NNP NNPC, for instance, gets the non-functional refineries working. The Dangote refinery starts working maybe earlier than people already are suspecting it would be, and contrary to what we heard earlier, right? We need all of those to be put in place, and more importantly, that it's indeed an economy that is market run and not run by some cabals. I think that's very critical for me.
All right. Temitope Kolade, Senior Manager, Power, Oil and Gas Unit at RDC Nigeria. Many thanks for your time, always on the show. Thank you for coming on board.
Thank you very much for having me.